The hum of the refrigerator was the loudest sound in the house. Every morning, its gentle murmur was the backdrop to the same rituals. Toast popping out of the toaster, the soft gurgle of coffee brewing, and the faint click of a spoon against porcelain. For Lydia, these moments were her only companions. At 54, she had built a life that was steady, predictable, and heartbreakingly quiet. Her days began and ended in the same way alone. Her marriage had dissolved years ago, her grown children scattered to pursue their lives in far-off cities. Lydia's home was tidy, her garden well-maintained, and her calendar filled with practical tasks that blurred into monotony. On Thursdays, she went grocery shopping. It was her one weekly outing she allowed herself to enjoy. She liked strolling down the aisles, organizing her cart as carefully as her life. Vegetables in one corner, cans neatly stacked, and bread placed on top to avoid being crushed. It wasn't much, but it was hers. That Thursday, she reached for a bag of oranges, her fingers brushing against another hand. "Oh, sorry," she exclaimed, turning to see who shared her moment of clumsiness. The voice that answered was warm and youthful, like a summer breeze. "No worries. It's not like these oranges are going anywhere." He was tall, with dark, slightly disheveled hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Lydia felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. "You can take it," she said quickly, stepping back. He laughed, picking up a second bag and handing it to her. "I think we can both win here." It should have been a forgettable encounter, but as she wheeled her cart away, Lydia found herself glancing back. He lingered in the produce section, inspecting apples with a surprising level of concentration. Her heart fluttered, an unfamiliar, almost forgotten sensation. It wasn't just his looks, though they were striking in a way that stirred something dormant inside her. It was the moment itself, a break in her monotonous life, a spark of light she hadn't known she needed. Lydia left the store that day with more than groceries. She carried with her the echo of his voice and the warmth of his smile. Something had shifted, ever so slightly, in the quiet rhythm of her life. Lydia didn't expect to see him again. The fleeting moment in the produce aisle felt like an anomaly, a pleasant but inconsequential blip in her predictable life. Yet, the following Thursday, there he was. She noticed him first, standing near the deli counter. He was scanning the options with the same thoughtful expression she remembered. Lydia's instinct was to look away and keep moving, but instead, she found herself slowing down. "Oranges again." His voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him smiling. He gestured to her cart, where a familiar bag of fruit rested. She laughed, a little flustered. "What can I say? I'm a creature of habit." "Well, it's good to have a signature item," he said, leaning casually on his cart. "Mine's the pre-made lasagna. Not very exciting, but it gets the job done." The way he spoke, light, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world, made Lydia feel at ease. They ended up chatting for several minutes, their conversation meandering from favorite foods to local restaurants. She learned his name was Ben, and he was 31, a graphic designer who worked remotely. He'd moved to the area recently, and was still exploring the town. When he mentioned struggling to find a good coffee spot, Lydia couldn't resist offering a recommendation. "There's a small cafe on Maple Street. Hearth and Brew. It's cozy, and their cappuccinos are the best." His eyes lit up. "I'll have to check it out. Thanks for the tip." As they parted ways, Lydia felt a pang of reluctance. It had been so long since she'd had a casual, pleasant conversation that wasn't about errands or obligations. Ben had brought an unexpected brightness to her day, and she found herself looking forward to their next chance encounter. Over the next few weeks, those encounters became more frequent and less coincidental. Lydia began to time her grocery trips later in the morning, and Ben, as it turned out, had a flexible schedule. Their chats grew longer, spanning everything from favorite movies to childhood memories. Ben had a way of making even the smallest things feel meaningful. He listened intently, laughed easily, and had a knack for finding humor in everyday situations. For Lydia, it was as though a part of her long dormant had come alive again. One day, as they stood by the bakery section discussing the merits of sourdough versus rye, he looked at her and said, "You know, I really enjoy talking to you. You make this place feel less like a chore and more like, I don't know, fun." Lydia felt her cheeks warm. "I could say the same about you." It was a simple exchange, but it lingered in her mind long after she left the store. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar and thrilling, a connection, unexpected and unbidden, that made her days a little brighter. It happened on a crisp afternoon in early spring. Lydia had been tending to her small garden, the repetitive motions of pruning and weeding offering a meditative rhythm to her thoughts. As she worked, her mind wandered to Ben, his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the easy way he made her feel seen. She sat back on her heels, brushing the dirt from her hands, and felt the realization settle over her like the sun breaking through clouds. She liked him, more than she had allowed herself to admit. At first, the thought felt absurd. He was nearly 20 years her junior, full of energy and possibilities, while she was rooted in her ways, her life a mosaic of predictable routines. What could he possibly see in her, beyond a friendly face at the grocery store? But the thought wouldn't leave her. It lingered as she prepared her tea, the steam curling up to meet her reflection in the kitchen window. She saw herself as she imagined Ben might. Soft lines framing her face, silver streaks threading through her dark hair, a quiet wisdom in her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to see beauty there. Still, doubt crept in, whispering cruel truths. "You're fooling yourself," it said. "He's just kind." Yet, when she thought back to their conversations, the way he looked at her, attentive, genuine, she couldn't dismiss the possibility entirely. The pivotal moment came a week later. They had run into each other outside Hearth and Brew, the cafe she had recommended. Ben had just ordered his drink and insisted on treating her to one as well. They sat at a small corner table, the hum of conversation and clinking cups surrounding them. Ben told her about his latest design project, a campaign for a local nonprofit, his voice animated with passion. Lydia listened intently, charmed by his enthusiasm. When the conversation paused, Ben leaned back in his chair, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "You know," he said, his tone more serious, "I feel like I've known you for years, Lydia. Talking to you, it feels natural, easy, like you just get it." The words struck a chord deep within her. She looked down at her hands, tracing the rim of her cup, feeling the weight of his gaze. She wanted to say something light, to deflect, but instead, she found herself replying honestly. "I think I've been so caught up in my own little world that I forgot what it's like to connect with someone. You've reminded me of that." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, meaningful, and Lydia felt a flutter of something she hadn't felt in decades. As they said their goodbyes, his hand brushed hers, a brief, accidental touch that sent warmth through her. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Lydia allowed herself to fully acknowledge the truth. She was falling for him, and it terrified her. The days that followed were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Lydia found herself caught in an internal tug-of-war between exhilaration and doubt. On one hand, the thought of Ben brought a lightness to her steps, a newfound anticipation for the simplest parts of her day. On the other, her mind churned with questions she couldn't silence. What would people think, she wondered late one night, sitting by her bedroom window, the moonlight casting soft shadows on her face. The age difference felt like a barrier she couldn't ignore, a wall built from years of societal norms and unspoken rules. Her best friend, Susan, had once joked about how younger men were only interested in women her age if they had something to gain. A wealthy widow or a free therapist, Susan had teased. The words echoed now, uninvited and cruel, making Lydia's heart sink. But Ben wasn't like that. She was certain of it. He had never once made her feel as though he was angling for something. If anything, it was his openness, his genuine interest in her thoughts and stories, that had drawn her in. Still, the doubts persisted. What if he only saw her as a friend? What if she misread his kindness as something more? She replayed their moments together, searching for clues, dissecting his smiles, his gestures, the way he spoke her name. Her fears weren't just about rejection. They were rooted in something deeper. A lifetime of learning to be cautious, of silencing her own desires in favor of practicality. She had lived most of her adult life as the responsible one, the dependable one, the woman who put others before herself. And now, this unexpected spark felt both thrilling and forbidden. The thought of confronting Ben with her feelings made her stomach twist. What if she ruined the easy camaraderie they had built? What if he stopped coming to the grocery store, or to Hearth and Brew? The mere thought of losing him, even as a friend, was unbearable. One evening, as she was flipping through an old photo album, Lydia paused at a picture of herself in her 20s. She was at a beach, her hair wild from the wind, her smile carefree. She hardly recognized the woman in the photo, a younger version of herself who had been bold and unafraid to take risks. What happened to her? Lydia murmured aloud. The answer was life, responsibilities, heartbreak, and the gradual erosion of youthful confidence had shaped her into who she was today. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to reclaim a piece of that daring spirit. She closed the album and leaned back in her chair, her thoughts shifting from doubt to determination. The truth was, she felt alive around Ben in a way she hadn't in years. And whether it was foolish or brave, she wasn't ready to let that feeling go. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, Lydia resolved to take a small step forward. She wouldn't rush, wouldn't overwhelm him or herself, but she would allow herself to hope, to see where this connection might lead. Because for the first time in a long time, her heart was awake and she couldn't bear to silence it. The idea came to Lydia during one of her quiet evenings. She was sorting through a box of old family recipes, many handwritten by her mother on yellowed index cards, when a memory surfaced. A cozy dinner with a dear friend where laughter filled the air and barriers dissolved over a warm meal. What better way to deepen her connection with Ben than by inviting him over for dinner? It wasn't a date, she told herself, just a friendly gesture. Yet, the thought sent a thrill through her that she hadn't felt in years. But as quickly as the idea formed, doubts followed. What if he thinks it's too much, she wondered. What if he's uncomfortable? The question swirled in her mind, and for days, she avoided acting on the impulse, retreating instead to her routine. One afternoon, she bumped into Ben at the grocery store. He was browsing the produce aisle, inspecting apples with his usual care. When he saw her, his face lit up with that easy, disarming smile. "Lydia," he called out, holding up an apple. "Red or green?" "I can never decide." "Red," she replied without hesitation. "Always red. Sweeter and more forgiving." He laughed, a warm sound that made her heart ache in the best way. As they chatted, Ben mentioned his love for trying new recipes but lamented his lack of cooking skills. The comment was all the encouragement Lydia needed. Gathering her courage, she smiled and said, "If you're up for it, I could teach you a thing or two. Maybe this weekend." For a brief moment, her nerves prickled as she awaited his response. What if he hesitated? What if he found an excuse to decline? But instead, his face brightened. "Are you serious?" "That'd be amazing," he said. "I've always wanted to learn how to make something more impressive than pasta." And just like that, it was settled. They agreed on Saturday evening. As Lydia walked home, a mix of excitement and apprehension filled her. Over the next few days, she prepared meticulously. She chose a recipe that was simple enough to teach, yet special enough to create an intimate atmosphere. Her mother's signature chicken marsala, served with roasted vegetables and fresh bread. She cleaned her home with a fervor she hadn't felt in years, arranging fresh flowers on the dining table, and even buying a new candle with a soft, warm scent. By the time Saturday arrived, Lydia's nerves were in overdrive. She stood in her kitchen, adjusting her apron, glancing at the clock, and wondering if she'd made a mistake. But when the doorbell rang and she opened it to find Ben standing there with a bottle of wine and a bright smile, all her worries melted away. "Hope I'm not too early," he said, holding out the wine. "I wasn't sure what pairs with chicken, but the guy at the store said this was a safe bet." "Perfect timing," Lydia replied, stepping aside to let him in. As they moved to the kitchen and she began walking him through the recipe, her initial nervousness gave way to an unexpected ease. Ben's enthusiasm and humor filled the space, transforming her quiet home into a place of warmth and light. And as they stood side by side, chopping vegetables and sharing stories, Lydia realized she had made the right decision. For the first time in years, she wasn't just existing. She was living. The evening unfolded like a dream, each moment more effortless than the last. They worked side by side in her kitchen, with Ben offering his clumsy but endearing attempts at stirring the sauce or peeling the potatoes. Lydia found herself laughing more than she had in months, her heart swelling with a joy she hadn't known she'd missed. There was something so intimate in the rhythm of cooking together. Each glance, each shared laugh, felt like a thread weaving them closer. As they moved to the table to eat, Lydia couldn't help but notice how natural the atmosphere had become between them. The dinner was delicious, better than she had remembered it being in years, but it was a connection that truly made the evening unforgettable. Ben poured the wine, and their conversation shifted to more personal topics. He told her about his childhood, about his dreams of traveling the world, of becoming a chef, and how he had always found solace in the simple act of cooking. She shared her own stories, of her late husband, of raising her children, and the quiet years that had followed. As they ate, Lydia allowed herself to simply be present. There were no expectations, no pressures, just the comfort of shared time and understanding. And yet, in the midst of it all, she could feel something more blooming, an undeniable pull between them that neither words nor time could suppress. They lingered over dessert, a rich chocolate mousse Lydia had made on a whim. The conversation became softer, more intimate. Ben's gaze held hers a little longer now, and when he reached across the table to refill her wine, his fingers brushed hers. The touch was so simple, so fleeting, but it sent a shock of warmth straight through her. Her heart raced, her breath catching in her chest. For a moment, she considered pulling away, making some excuse, but she couldn't. She didn't want to. Ben didn't pull back either. Instead, he held her gaze, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. The air between them thickened, charged with a quiet anticipation that neither of them could deny. He began, his voice low and uncertain. Lydia swallowed hard, her throat dry, her pulse thundering in her ears. "What is it, Ben?" He hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing in around them. He didn't need to say anything more. Lydia could feel the question hanging in the air, the same question that had been building inside her for weeks. Slowly, she stood up from the table and walked to the living room, not sure what was pushing her, only knowing that she needed to move. Ben followed her, his footsteps quiet against the hardwood floor. She reached for the door that led to her small balcony, a place she often retreated to when she needed to clear her thoughts. The night air was cool, and the city below seemed to pulse with life. She leaned against the railing, looking out over the twinkling lights, but all she could focus on was the man standing beside her. His presence was magnetic, pulling her in. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Ben's voice broke the silence. "I feel like there's something between us, Lydia," he said quietly, his words trembling on the edge of uncertainty. Lydia turned to face him, her heart thumping in her chest. "I feel it too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The distance between them seemed to close in that moment, and when Ben reached out to gently touch her arm, Lydia's breath caught again. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the same raw honesty she had come to know in their conversations. It was there, in that simple touch, in the way they both allowed themselves to be open, to be real. Ben moved closer, and without thinking, Lydia closed the space between them. She let her hand rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. The warmth of him, the intensity of the connection between them, it was overwhelming. And then, as if the moment had been waiting for them both to take the leap, he kissed her. It was slow, tentative at first, but as their lips met, Lydia felt a rush of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Longing, desire, hope. It was everything she had been afraid of, and everything she had been craving. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Lydia found herself replaying the kiss over and over in her mind, unable to shake the warmth of it, the way it had changed everything between them. But as the initial excitement began to settle, so too did a quiet sense of uncertainty. She had never allowed herself to feel like this, desire, longing, passion. Certainly not in her 50s, and certainly not with someone younger than her. Her life had been full of responsibilities, commitments, and the quiet rhythm of daily routines. Love, she had thought, had passed her by. But now, standing on the edge of something new, she couldn't ignore the way Ben made her feel. Every glance, every touch, reminded her of the parts of herself she had long since forgotten, parts that had lain dormant for years. She had thought those days were behind her, but now she realized how alive she felt. The age difference between them was something that lingered at the back of her mind, a nagging whisper she couldn't quite silence. What would people think? Would Ben's friends and family approve of this? And more importantly, could they truly have something real, something lasting, despite the years that separated them? One evening, as she sat alone in her living room, a soft rain tapping against the window, Lydia couldn't help but reflect on the passage of time. Her children were grown and living their own lives, and she had carved out a quiet existence for herself. But what was that life now? Was she meant to spend the rest of her days wrapped in memories of the past, or was there more left for her to experience? The truth was, love didn't come with an expiration date. She had believed that for so long. Believed that once you reached a certain age, romance was no longer a part of the picture. But Ben had shown her that love, true love, could happen at any age, under any circumstance. There was no rule book, no right or wrong way to feel. What did it matter if their connection was unexpected or unconventional? What mattered was the way he made her feel. Alive, seen, desired. It was a feeling she couldn't ignore, couldn't push away. In the quiet moments when she was alone, Lydia began to understand that the fear she had been carrying, of judgment, of the inevitable questions, was not something she had to let dictate her happiness. Life had already shown her that time could be fleeting. And now, more than ever, she wanted to seize the moments she had, without hesitation. She had spent so many years living for others, for her children, her husband, her family. But now, for the first time, she was living for herself. And what she had found with Ben wasn't something to be feared or hidden. It was something to be embraced. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone vibrating on the table. Ben had sent her a message. Had an amazing time the other night. I'm thinking about it a lot. I think about you a lot. Lydia smiled softly, her heart fluttering. The words were simple, but they carried weight. She had been so afraid to let herself feel this, afraid that she would be judged, or that it would all end in heartbreak. But as she read his message again, she felt something shift within her. Perhaps love didn't have to make sense. Maybe it wasn't about finding the right time or the right person. Maybe it was about following the heart, trusting it, even when the path seemed uncertain. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone and typed back, "I've been thinking about you too. Let's see where this goes." For the first time in a long time, Lydia allowed herself to embrace the unknown. And it felt like freedom. Love was ageless. Lydia sat on her balcony one quiet afternoon, the late summer sunlight casting long shadows across the city below. She looked out over the rooftops, lost in thought, as the distant sounds of traffic and people mingled with the rustling of the leaves on the trees. The air was warm but carried a promise of change, of something new unfolding. Looking back over the past few months, Lydia couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. What had once felt like an impossible leap into the unknown now seemed like the most natural thing in the world. She had walked a long, winding road to get here, through loneliness, through years of sacrifice, and through moments of quiet reflection. But now, with Ben by her side, she felt as though she had discovered a new chapter of herself. Her relationship with Ben wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments of doubt, still the occasional twinge of fear about what others might think. But more often than not, Lydia found herself letting go of those fears. She realized that the only approval she needed was her own. And she had learned to listen to the voice inside her that urged her to take risks, to embrace the joy of now, without worrying about what might come tomorrow. Ben had shown her that love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for. That it was okay to desire connection, no matter your age. And more importantly, that love didn't fit into neat, predictable boxes. It was messy, beautiful, and sometimes unexpected. It had no expiration date. As she stood up from her chair and stretched her arms toward the sky, Lydia couldn't help but smile. She had discovered something within herself that she hadn't known was possible. The ability to love again, to feel the kind of passion and tenderness that had once seemed like a distant memory. The kind of love that wasn't constrained by age, by time, or by societal expectations. Looking at the horizon, Lydia felt hopeful. Love, she realized, wasn't something to be feared or dismissed. It was something to be embraced, at any stage in life. It was a reminder that no matter how many years passed, there was always time to open your heart to something new, to something beautiful. She thought about Ben again, the warmth of his smile, the way his presence had become such a part of her world. There were no guarantees in life, no promises of forever, but for the first time in a long time, Lydia was ready to see where this love could take her. She was ready to step into the unknown, knowing that whatever happened, she had lived fully without fear. And that in itself was enough.